Source, or
Source.
is the game engine that's famously known for random Gmod animations, Counter-Strike, and of course, the bane of all existence. I'm sure every single one of you, except for that one guy, know what Source is, so no history lesson needed here. But as a quick summary, Valve's first game, Half-Life, ran on the Goldsrc engine, but for the sequel, they didn't want to use the same thing, so they built a brand new engine entirely from scratch, called it Source, and it... See, I should have seen this coming. Almost 2 years ago, I made a video called The History of Goldsrc Games, and of course, 90% of the comments are going to be, how about the history of Source? That should have been obvious. The main reason I didn't want to make this video is because there are a lot of games that run on Source, which in turn would make this video super long. And if you haven't noticed, it takes me a long time just to make a 9-minute video, so a 30 to 50-minute video is, concerning. So this video I've been slowly making behind the scenes alongside my other videos for a few months. And even though I'm leaving the Valve circle, this is the one Valve video that I've promised to make. So here it is. Just like the other video, I'm going to look back and go over every game that has been made using the Source engine in chronological order, and I'll try to minimize any spoilers. I can't guarantee though. I may look at a couple mods if they're significant, but not all of them, because if I did that, this video would be 30 hours instead of minutes. And related to that, to not make this video too long, I'll only be briefly going over each game. Like a quick summary. I'm basing this list off the Wikipedia page for the Source engine, so I'm hoping it's fairly accurate. And if you're a teacher that despises Wikipedia, then sounds like a you problem. And of course, I'm going from the oldest to the newest. So let's start. First is actually Counter-Strike Source. Yes, not Half-Life 2. This because CS Source had a beta release in August, 3 months before Half-Life 2 and CS Source released. So technically, people's first experience with Source is through Counter-Strike Source. Anyway, you guys know what Counter-Strike is. Bad guy versus good guy, or other way around. Plus aiming is different, and you need to be financially literate. Then, next is Half-Life 2, the staple of what the Source engine is. A continuation of Half-Life 1, where Earth gets invaded while Gordon is asleep. Then he wakes up and starts a rebellion within 2 days. What a Chad. But most of you already knew all this. Then it gets odd because you would think all of the first games made with the Source engine are games made by Valve. But no, the next game is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which was made by Troika Games and released the same day as Half-Life 2. They actually used the Source engine while it was still in development. That must have been a nightmare. But the game itself is about someone who died and got revived as a vampire, going through Los Angeles to discover something. I don't know, I never played it. But it was intended to be an indirect sequel to Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. Although since it was competing with Half-Life 2, it sold very poorly, which led Troika Games to fail in 2005. RIP. Half-Life Source was also released on November 16th, 2004, same day as the other 2 games. The idea behind it was to have Half-Life in the brand new Source engine, except they just straight up ported the game over, leaving most things the same like textures and models. The new things included the new lighting system, ragdoll physics, and realistic water, which compared to the blocky textures, didn't really fit. Plus there were other minor changes that didn't really make any sense. I made a video all about it like 3 years ago. And even Valve agreed, because on the 20th anniversary of Half-Life, they unlisted Half-Life Source from Steam. Half-Life 2 Deathmatch released on November 30th, 2004, and just like how Half-Life 1 multiplayer had a deathmatch mode, this was the same thing for Half-Life 2, although they for some reason decided to make it its own separate game. To match the identity of Half-Life 2, the deathmatch mode consisted of 2 teams, the Rebels and the Combine, throwing explosive barrels with a gravity gun. And it's as simple as that, nothing extra. Day of Defeat Source was released on September 26, 2005, and it does the same thing that Counter-Strike Source did for Counter-Strike. It brought the game Day of Defeat, which was a Goldsrc game, to the Source engine with a whole lot of updated stuff instead of just being a port. It's actually pretty fun, with the main game mode being similar to Conquest and Battlefield. You can even pick different classes similar to Team Fortress. It was actually fairly popular back in the day, but now it's kinda dead. Half-Life 2 Lost Coast is a very short game released by Valve. It was actually a scrap chapter that was going to be in Half-Life 2, but they repurposed it to show off HDR in the Source engine, along with developer commentary.
Hi, this is Gabe Newell.
It's actually kind of fun, despite it being 10 minutes long at most. Half-Life Deathmatch Source is the deathmatch portion of Half-Life Source. They, again, for some reason decided to make it its own game. And it actually came out a few weeks after Half-Life Source, more like a year. I don't know where I conjured up a few weeks from, which made it kind of disappointing for most people. That part is true. It kept all the same jank that Half-Life Source had, except I'd say it was a little more interesting because when you have 32 people in a Crossfire server, all that jank adds up to something cool. Half-Life 2 Episode 1 is a continuation of Half-Life 2, and the first instance of Valve's refusal to name anything with the number 3. This one is much shorter than Half-Life 2, but nonetheless still a game. Garry's Mod is a sandbox game made by Garry Newman, first starting out as an actual mod for Half-Life 2 to bring back the physics gun, but then later became its own game with many more tools, custom servers, and a workshop with way too many add-ons to count. The cultural significance of Gmod cannot be understated, as there's probably some form of media you like that originated or became popular because of Gmod. It's also the game that I've played the most. Sin Episodes is a game made by Ritual Entertainment, the same guys that made Counter-Strike Condition Zero. However, I'm sure most of you haven't heard about it, considering after 18 years there's less than 700 reviews. As you can guess by the name, Sin Episodes was supposed to be a series of 9 episodes that released every 6 months, but they only ever released one, called Emergence. It's about this guy named John Blade, and as him you have to take down a very purposefully designed scientist who wants to change the human race. For the short time that I played it, it was pretty good, but maybe that's just me. Next is Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. Quite the name. This looks to be one of those medieval RPG scrolls type games. It was made by Arcane Studios, the ones that made Dishonored and Prey, but published by Satan himself. It was also released for the Xbox 360, so let me know if you're one of the few who did that. Now in this game you play as a guy named Sereth, and that's all I know because it seems to have a very complex storyline. Still, I have never heard of this game until now. It plays fairly well from the demo I tried, and it seems most people liked it. The ship Murder Party was made by Studio Outerlight, which after making their second game mysteriously closed in 2010. The ship, however, was first a mod for the original Half-Life, but then they redeveloped it in Source. However, it looks like they kept the visual design of the Goldsrc engine because looks like it's still in the Goldsrc engine, even to how some of the NPCs move. The single player is about someone named Mr. X who gave out tickets for a cruise. However, it was a trap, because now each passenger has to track down and execute some other passenger. For the multiplayer, it was similar to Among Us before Among Us. Truly ahead of its time. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 is a continuation from Half-Life 2 Episode 1. It's just another episode, simple as that. Unfortunately, it was the last episode to ever come out because Valve still can't count to 3. At least Episode 2 takes place in a brand new environment, a forest, which is at least something new compared to the city in the base game. Team Fortress 2 is a sequel to Team Fortress 1 from the Goldsrc days, except this one differs in style. Heavily. TF1 stayed semi-realistic, and they wanted to continue that for TF2 shown by their previous stuff, but then they decided to go full-on cartoonish, and we ended up with this. Bot Haven. This is still, after 17 years, one of Valve's most played games. Truly incredible. Portal is probably one of the most popular puzzle games of all time. It was quietly and unexpectedly released in the orange box. The game consists of several chambers where you have to solve puzzles using portals and physics, and then you end up having to use the portals practically to defeat a giant swinging robot on the roof. Storytelling. Dystopia was developed by Team Dystopia. It's also a total conversion mod of Half-Life, and it still is. You can download it on Steam for free. This game is multiplayer only though, so you'll need a good amount of players. However, just like almost every decade-old game, the servers are about as empty as my will to live. If you do manage to find some folks, the game has some similarities to Team Fortress. You have 2 teams fighting, both teams need to complete some objectives within a time limit, and each team has classes, except there's only 3 instead of 9. Sadly, it has passed away. Insurgency Modern Infantry Combat is also a total conversion mod of Half-Life 2 that you can still download for free. This game dialed realism to 11. There's no HUD like in real life, you can die in 2 shots like in real life, and there's no crosshair like in real life. The environments in the game are also usually very dull and sad looking, just like in real life. The game itself is very simple though. Similar to Conquest and Battlefield, the game is based on objectives, where you need to capture all the areas on the map to win. Just like in real life. Left 4 Dead is Valve's first true zombie game. I mean, their other games also had zombies in it, but it wasn't their focus. Left 4 Dead has zombies as the whole point. The game is supposed to be played with 4 people because you need allies, but if you're lonely you can play by yourself and the other characters will just be controlled by bots. What's unique in this game is that the campaign is supposed to be played in one sitting. Because of that, it's very short and you're not able to save your progress. Unfortunate. Following Left 4 Dead, Valve made Left 4 Dead 2, and with that they continue their tradition of never making a 3rd game. Left 4 Dead 2 is very similar to the first game with having the same 4-player system, but now it has 5 different stories you can play that consist of a few smaller levels, essentially adding checkpoints. There's still no manual saving. The best part is that there's mod support now, so you can make the guns look different, you can have Mario on your team, or you can even make all the zombies Teletubbies instead. Infinite possibilities. Zeno Clash is an action fighting game made by the Ace team, and by fighting I mean fist fighting. You know, caveman stuff. It also takes place in a fantasy world with weird creatures, insert Skyrim reference here, accompanied by a fantasy-esque plotline. But other than that, it seems like you're a generic fighting game, just in first person, which is unique in itself because almost all fighting games that I know of are in third person. NeoTokyo is, again, a total conversion mod of Half-Life 2 made by Studio Radiate. This one is also multiplayer only, so considering it's from 2009, it sees almost no activity these days. Though from what I see, its gameplay matches today's most popular game modes, TDM and Capture the Ghost. And if you're wondering what Capture the Ghost is, it's basically VIP, just with a different name. So original. Bloody Good Time is another game developed by Outer Light in 2010, and it's supposed to be a direct sequel to their previous game, The Ship. It's pretty similar in almost every way, except now it also has a deathmatch game mode, which The Ship didn't have. And it also went with a very deliberate art direction. Very deliberate. Vindictus is an MMORPG made by DevCat, which is a studio within Nexon. Those are the same people that made Counter-Strike Nexon Studio, so they went full circle on that. And unlike most other Source games, this one is free. Now, I've never really played MMORPGs, so I can't comment on anything, but just from watching other MMORPGs, it follows a similar premise. You explore dungeons and fight monsters, except this is not Dungeons & Dragons. I Divine Cybermancy is an action role-playing game made by Streamon Studio, which is, sorry this might really scare you, French. It was apparently based on a role-playing board game that Stream developed but never released called AVA. I've never heard of a video game studio making a board game, but that would have been interesting. The game has a very futuristic, dystopian cyberpunk setting that looks very dark and gritty, 9 years before Cyberpunk 2077 released. What I found funny is that on the store page, the first two videos are gameplay showcases, and you can clearly tell that the running and water sounds are exactly the same as Half-Life 2. I can't tell if that was on purpose or not. Alien Swarm is a top-down multiplayer game made by Valve. Actually, originally it was a remake of an Unreal Tournament mod, but the developers were hired by Valve, so now it's made by Valve. This game is also free to play, and I guess so is the entire codebase. It seems to have a very similar idea to Left 4 Dead. You have 4 people on a team and you have to make it through a map to complete some task while you're facing swarms of aliens. Huh? Get it? It's the name. Like I said, this game is multiplayer only, but much like most Valve games, there is still some amount of people playing it. Though if there's truly no one, there is bot support, so at least you can pretend. Portal 2 is the sequel to Portal Uno, and it's much of the same. You use portals to solve various puzzles. What's different is that Portal 2 is much longer, like 5 hours longer. It also went with a very different story method with way more dialogue and humor. Plus, there's a co-op mode. I made a whole video directly comparing them if you're interested. The best part of Portal 2, I think, is that there's now workshop support. You can make and share your own custom test chambers, and there's a lot of interesting ones. And from these changes, Portal 2 seems to be much more liked than Portal 1. No More Room in Hell is another survival horror zombie game that started as a Half-Life mod, except this one is still free. Made by Matt Kazan, it's similar to Left 4 Dead, even having objective-style maps. Except unlike Left 4 Dead, this game aims for realism. It's survival horror, not action horror, so the gameplay is much slower, health and ammo is very scarce, you don't have a crosshair, and the environments are much darker. There's no reviving, so once you die, that's it, but because of that, you can play with up to 8 people at once instead of only 4. Solid game. Nuclear Dawn is a real-time strategy game that, again, started as a mod, but later became a full project by Innerwave Studios. This game has a similar style to Team Fortress where you can choose different classes, except for the commander who has an overhead view instead to command the team and place down objects. But, you know, you can probably imagine how that turned out. But other than that, pretty normal FPS. Postal 3, made by Trashmaster and Running with Scissors, best names by the way, is actually fairly popular, so some of you have probably heard of it. It is most known for being a dumpster fire of a game, which is kinda surprising because Postal 1 and 2 had extremely positive ratings. But you can read some of the reviews and see why. Also proven by the fact that the game crashes if you try to throw a grenade. This game set itself apart by being third person. Postal 1 was isometric and Postal 2 was first person. But other than that, it's just as wacky as the other two games. Dino D-Day, made by 800 North and Digital Ranch, brought the absolutely hilarious idea of having dinosaurs in World War II. Yep, that's what we're working with here. It plays kinda like Dave Defeats Source, except you'll be seeing dinosaurs walking around. Apparently it became sort of a meme around the time, and it's a pretty generic World War II game, but they made the brilliant choice of letting you play as the dinosaurs, so it's automatically a 10 out of 10 game, don't even at me on that. Dear Esther is an adventure game made by the studio The Chinese Room, which from the name means it's obviously a British studio, like that should be obvious. You're kinda dumb if you thought it was Korean. As per usual, it started as a Half-Life 2 mod, but it's now a whole game. It's an adventure game, so you're going to be doing a lot of exploring. Actually, that's the only thing you're going to be doing, just walking around. There's no combat, there's no puzzles, no NPCs, nothing. Just a walking simulator. Well, except for the insane amount of monologuing, but that's really it. My only complaint is that you walk kinda slow, and you can't even sprint, but I guess that forces you to take in the environment. It can be considered horror because you're on an abandoned island and you have to explore these dark buildings, but that's it. It's also really short, just an hour long. And for replay value, thankfully you can drown yourself. Counter-Strike Global Offensive was the fan-favorite Counter-Strike for a long while until they sent it to the Shadow Realm a couple months ago. You might know the story of how CSGO was originally supposed to be a console port of Counter-Strike Source, but at some point that changed and they made it for PC, hence why the buy menu was a circle. It then became the de facto Counter-Strike for competitive and almost anything. It's changed a lot, the menu got changed twice, weapons were added, and the game even went free to play. All of that is history now though, because now we have CS2 instead. Hybrid is a third-person game made by Fifth Cell and was developed only for the Xbox 360. Nothing else. You can't play this one on PC. Plot-wise, an alien species comes to invade Australia, which is probably for the better because they'll feel right at home. Other than that, it is much like any other third-person game. There are a ton of cover mechanics, including one where you hang off the roof, and you just play one team versus another, accompanied by generic Half-Life 2 sounds. This game is relatively obscure, however, because if you just search the game on YouTube, you can only find 4 or 5 videos on it total. Tactical Intervention was a multiplayer FPS game made by Min Lee. Yes, the same person that made the original Counter-Strike. Just like Counter-Strike, there's a terrorist team and a counter-terrorist team, and a game mode where you have to save hostages. Unfortunately, it was shut down in 2013 because it wasn't popular enough for OG Planet to be able to maintain, and even though they've said multiple times that they've wanted to bring it back, that clearly hasn't happened. RIP. The Stanley Parable is, for the nth time, another game that started as a Half-Life 2 mod made by Davey Redden and William Pugh. They then remade it into a full-on game, and then they made the Ultra Deluxe Edition. However, that one was made in Unity so it could be released on every console. Sad. You likely know of this game though because it has a lot of notoriety. You simply play as a guy named Stanley, and you have a narrator that's telling you what to do. It's best known for its amazing dialogue because if you actively ignore what the narrator is saying, the dialogue gets funnier.
So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction. Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago.
Counter-Strike Online 2 was made by Nexon again, this time being a sequel to Counter-Strike Online 1, which was made in Goldsrc. And despite Online 2 using the same source engine that CS Source used, they tried their best not to copy-paste by remaking all the assets themselves. Though unfortunately as well, they shut down in 2018 because of poor operation. RIP again. Dota 2 is a MOBA game made by Valve. It's a sequel to Dota 1, which is actually a Warcraft 3 mod, not Half-Life mod. Still a mod though. Like Counter-Strike, this game also consistently gets 200,000 players at any time. However, because it's also free to play, Valve has gone to the dark side and sells battle passes for the game. But other than that, it's a MOBA game. I've never played MOBA games, so I don't know what it's like, but clearly it's somewhat good. Although, like CSGO, this game was also ported to Source 2, so it's not a Source 1 game anymore. Blade Symphony is a sword-fighting action game made by Puny Human. It's not traditional or medieval sword fighting because, well, look at the characters and the animations. The actual sword fighting seems semi-sophisticated, like you can do different kinds of combos and even wall jump. And with your brand new skills, you can 1v1 someone, go in a 2v2, play the equivalent of domination, or just go free-for-all in a sandbox. That's kind of it though, it seems to be pretty average. Consortium seems to be a role-playing game made by Interdimensional Games. I don't know for certain because for me the game just blacks out every minute, so who knows? From what I've read, the story follows someone named Bishop 6, who is part of the Consortium, which seems to be some kind of international police. But during a flight, you have to deal with mercenaries, and you have to find out the traitors in the crew. So, basically Among Us again. Dang it! They seem to be making a remaster of it, and there's even a VR version, so that could be cool. but the original game from 2014 seems to be removed from Steam, so... Contagion is a survival horror game made by Monochrome. I would say it's similar to Left 4 Dead again, but actually I'd say it's more like No Room in Hell because it's survival horror and it goes for realism. There's 4 game modes you can do. There's Hunted, which is kind of like free-for-all, except if you die you become a zombie, so you have to try to be the last one standing. There's Escape, which is the Left 4 Dead style of game. There's Extraction, where you have to explore a location to find NPCs to save. And Flatline, which is a wave-based mode. There's also Panic Objective and Panic Classic, which is meant to be similar to a different mod called Zombie Panic Source. Insurgency, made by New World Interactive, is a sequel to Insurgency Modern Infantry Combat, though it's much of the same, just focused on being as realistic as possible. Really the only new part is that there are many more game modes to choose from. Aperture Tag, made by the team with the same name, is another game that started as a mod for Portal 2. This game surprisingly got rid of the portal gun. I know, that sounds crazy, let me explain. Instead of a portal gun, you solve puzzles with the new paint gun, which shoots the blue and orange gel that was in Portal 2. And given how the gels work, naturally the puzzles are going to be more platformy, which is pretty interesting, but, you know, maybe I'm weird. And even though it started as a mod, this game still has new characters, unique voice acting, a co-op mode, and a level editor similar to Portal 2. Fistful of Frags is a multiplayer Western Half-Life 2 mod made by the Fistful of Frags team. It's a very simple game though, it's multiplayer only, where you can play free-for-all or versus 4 teams in a Wild West style setting. That's basically it. It isn't much popular nowadays, so finding a full game might be kinda tough. Portal Stories Mel is a Portal 2 mod made by Prism Studios. It follows the same style as the main Portal games, solving puzzles with portals, except now you don't play as Shell, you play as someone named Mel, and you try to escape just like Shell did, just in a different environment. It was praised a lot for its looks, and even I must say that it looks amazing. However, a lot of people criticize it for being too hard, which to that I say, skill issue? The Beginner's Guide is an interactive storytelling game made by Davey Redden. Do you remember? That's the same person that made the Stanley Parable. So it seems to me that Davey Redden has a thing for very interesting storytelling games, and clearly he's good at it. This game is narrated by Davey Redden himself. The point of this game is to show you many different smaller games that was made by someone named Coda. If anything, this is more of a playable documentary, which is definitely an uncommon thing. And it might not be interesting to you, but I really liked it. Infra is a first-person adventure game made by Loist Interactive. If you're a fan of exploring urban places, this is the game for you. You play as a structural engineer who is going around to different places to inspect any damages, and you keep noticing some odd things while exploring.
It's not good.
This is truly an adventure and exploration game with some puzzles throughout. There's tons of places you're gonna see. There's the nice outdoors and the slightly eerie and dark undergrounds. Oh yeah, this game does have the horror tag on it, so you interpret that how you want. No need to worry though, because the game is fairly short. It's only like, you know, more than 20 hours long. Day of Infamy is yet another realistic FPS made by New World Interactive. It's the same idea to Insurgency, however this time it's set in World War II. Actually, this game started out as a mod for Insurgency, but then they made it its own game. And I'm sure the name wasn't inspired by anything else, it's 100% original. However, unlike Insurgency, I've heard this game has slowly declined and is almost dead now. Unfortunate, but that's just how it goes. Hunt Down the Freeman is a Half-Life fan game made by Royal Rudius Entertainment, and is best known for being the laughingstock for anything Half-Life related. There has been so much bad press about this game that the developers even embraced it and make fun of their own game, which is truly, something. However, all the bad reviews are justified when you realize that the game barely has consistency, terrible level design, more bugs than Australia, and as of the day I'm recording this, crashes at startup. That's right, you can't even play it. I made a video about all of that if you want to see it. Black Mesa is a fan-made remake of Half-Life 1 made by Crowbar Collective, and is the exact opposite of Hunt Down the Freeman. It's actually good. The reason they even made this first mod and then game was because of how terrible Half-Life Source was. And I'm glad Half-Life Source became terrible because, damn, this game is good. Now keep in mind, this game is a remake, not a remaster, so there's a lot of stuff that's different. But as long as you're not an elitist, you'll appreciate it. And finally, the last game, G-String, which is an FPS game made by Aora. And it's very similar to Half-Life 2 in a lot of ways. They both take place in a dystopian future, and since the game was based on Half-Life 2's code, the games feel very similar. Even the main character you play as, Mio, has telekinesis, which functionally works the same as the gravity gun in Half-Life 2. The weapon selection system looks similar, and the enemies act the same as the Combine in Half-Life 2. So I'd consider G-String to be a slight remix of Half-Life 2, which loops back to the origins. Not quite, because just as I finished writing the script, the Wikipedia page was updated with another game, Entropy 02, which when I think about it is quite worthy of being on the list, so I'll add it to this video too. Entropy 02, made by Breadman, is a sequel to the Half-Life 2 mod Entropy 01, without the 1, where you played as a Metro Cop that's now an elite. Basically, you play on the opposite team. It is technically still a mod because I believe it was designed as a mod, and mechanically the game functions the same as Half-Life 2, because it was a mod. But it was significant enough that it now stands as its own game, because if you play it, you could be convinced that it was a sequel made by Valve themselves. And fittingly, it being entirely based on Half-Life 2 does indeed bring us back to where this all started. And that is it. That is almost every game that has been made in the Source engine. Now I know someone is going to point it out in the comments if I don't, but Titanfall 1 and 2 and Apex Legends are made in engines that are derived from the Source engine, not made directly in. Titanfall 1 was made in a super customized version of Source, and then Titanfall 2 used an upgraded version of that. So technically they were kind of made in Source, but since it's been modified so heavily, you can't really call them the same engine. You know, for an engine that has existed for 20 years, it's really impressive that it has managed to stay relevant for this long. We went from this, and we managed to make a 20-year-old engine do this, which is a miracle. And it's probably not done yet. There might be something that's being developed in Source right now that would eventually make this video obsolete. So thanks, unknown developers. And just like how we went from Goldsrc to Source, we now have Source 2, which I was gonna say it's a lot newer, so there's not many games made on it, which that second part is true, but Source 2 is actually almost a decade old already. So maybe in another 10 years I might do a history of Source 2 games. We'll see on that. But for now, this is what we have on Source, and this is the end of this gargantuan video. But anyways, bye. Wait, is it still recording? Oh, fuck.